There has been this term used like Londongrad because of Russian oligarchs buying a lot of real estate and so on. So I think we should start talking more about South African oligarch because that's what they are. Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, they are oligarchs who are trying to gain infinite power basically.
I just saw recently, yesterday, that a member of the State Duma started talking about, okay, 28 or 2029, that's when Europe are going to be attacking Russia. That's when they're priming. So reading into this and knowing that the Russians always project their own agenda onto others.
So if we go way back, we go to January of 2014. Over 60% of Russians held a positive attitude towards Ukrainians. January 2015, 60% held negative attitude towards Ukrainians.
But I talked to the head of the Moldovan Press Association, and she told me basically to them it's like Chinese water torture, the Russian hybrid warfare. Like it's just drip, 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 slowly eroding the stability and cohesion of Moldovan society, right?
China is still like they're just starting their engines. So what will happen once China uses AI to supercharge the whole thing, and they just use their massive amount of resources to do the same as Russia. So yeah, hey everyone, my name is Pekka Kallionemi. I am the creator of a series called Vatnik Soup that examines Russian propagandists and their main narratives. I come from Finland. I have a background in academia. I have a PhD in interactive technology. And basically what I do is I look into social media and disinformation on social media and how it's being spread by malign actors like the Kremlin, for example.
All right. And my name is Morten, and I'm a Danish historian working as a journalist in Denmark. And publish my own newsletter about the affairs of Europe, and I've been privileged enough to help Pekka turn his brilliant series Vatnik Soup into a book, which we have actually sold out the first edition of, and now we are working on getting the second edition ready with a couple of new Vatniks and little updated information. So and we're in London to talk about that.
Okay, Vatnik, what is a Vatnik? So, to us, a Vatnik is somebody who spreads and or believes Russian narratives. Russia has a handful of main narratives that they try to spread around online, and they do it extremely aggressively. So Vatnik is somebody who kind of promotes these ideas, and sometimes they support these ideas, but sometimes they don't. Many of them are completely cynical. They maybe get paid. So it can be the motivators behind spreading these narratives. They can be different. So yeah, that's basically it. A soup. So when I started Vatnik Soup in October in 2022, it wasn't called Vatnik Soup. Somebody told me that this was still the time of hashtags. People were using hashtags, and somebody told me that you need a hashtag. And he said, okay, maybe try Vatnik Soup. And I thought about it. It sounded really nice. It's like soup. It's very easy to digest. It's very easy to eat a soup, and it's light. So I thought, okay, yeah, these are quite light. The threads that I write and the text is easy to read. So I thought, okay, yeah, this is good, and then it stuck.
Yeah, and also soup it's an interesting metaphor because it works on different levels, right? Because you have the readers who are ingesting the soup, but also it kind of symbolizes the way that these Vatniks and people who are prone to their narratives kind of fall into a soup of disinformation and lies, and that it can be very difficult once you've landed in the soup to kind of swim out of it. So what Pekka is also trying to do is kind of rescue people from drowning or falling too far into the soup, you could say. So it's I think it's a really apt metaphor in that sense.
Okay, who are my favorite Vatniks? I always say Ian Miles Chong, because most people don't know who he is. He is a guy from Malaysia. who has been involved in different social media platforms for decades, basically probably 2 decades. He started on Reddit, and he did some he was like a moderator there, but at some point he started making money by grifting. So he was making money by writing propaganda, and the thing is that almost everybody hates Ian Miles Chong. It's like, who is the most hated person on X? I think Ian Miles Chong would be up there. He's friends with Elon Musk, actually, and he's a columnist for RT also. So many people don't know this, but he's like this person who changes his worldview based on like how he could make more money.
Yeah.
And he's my favorite Vatnik in a sense, because he's so like, there is no value system, there's no morale behind it. It's all about money, it's all about engagement, it's all about this kind of rage baiting where you just try to people react to your messaging, and it's like, it's such a cynical, hypocritical approach to the whole thing.
Yes, I think someone like Ian Miles Chong, that Pekka is talking about, he's very emblematic, like of this grifter culture and this post-truth culture that's kind of represented with a lot of these Vatnik grifters. They really just go to where the internet cloud is, where the money, where the fame, and they try to monetize profit on this outrage they're doing. Like, we call them outrage merchants as well in the book, right? Someone like Jackson Hinkle would be a great example as well. And just like Ian Miles Chong, there are people who you can go back, the internet keeps records, right? So you can go back 10 years and they held completely opposite views on many things, like supporting gay marriages, or, being against Russia's invasion, as Ian Miles Chong was initially. But then he figured out, hold on, I'm not getting any views, I'm not getting any likes and clicks, but what if I just completely reinvent myself as this Russian lapdog? And all of a sudden there's interest, there's traction, so he's very emblematic of a very interesting case study in these grifters. I think we described the anatomy of a grifter using Hinkle as an example, but Ian Miles Chong could be someone we did that with as well, I think.
So how does the economic structure, how is it built around this grifting? So there are many mechanisms that are being utilized there. First of all, Elon Musk made a system that you can actually get paid if you get likes, if you get shares. So basically, engagement farming is a good. You can make quite a lot of money through that. But also, a lot of them have different. They are on different platforms or for crowdfunding, so you can give them money for their content and so on. And this is actually where. This is theory. I think the Kremlin works through these platforms. So they pay creators for their content, for the propaganda through these like platforms like Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee, where you can give like 10 euros. So if you send hundreds of these small donations, it doesn't really raise any reactions, but it's very easy to kind of launder money to these creators from Kremlin by using these platforms. Of course, another approach would be funding using shell companies like they did in the case of Tenet Media. Yeah. So they use the shell companies and they launder money to American companies, and then they pay these big YouTube creators, so they tell stories like anti-Ukraine stories and so on, like there's massive corruption problem. So yeah, Kremlin is extremely good at kind of finding different ways to launder money to these creators.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to build on what Pekka is saying there, there's also an undercurrent of contrarianism at play here. So it's a lot of, going against the so-called established narrative becomes sort of meshed up in this conspiracy theory culture where, there must be something going on behind the scenes. They're not telling it how it is. So there's a lot of money and a lot of content to be made from saying that, I have the real truth. I know what's going on. you see Vatniks like Joe Rogan, who will be featured in the second edition of the book, who's someone who's very much profited from he used to just sit in his studio smoking weed and saying, oh, maybe jiu-jitsu is cool if Godzilla could do it, or like spouting some nonsense. But now he's become this full-on Vatnik, just raging against the government, the mainstream media, and interestingly, he is the mainstream media now, right? So, but there's a lot of this contrarianism that fuels a lot of these Vatniks, I think. Like they've identified being against the established system, the elites, really talks to a lot of people who feel rage and who feel left behind.
I think, what ingredients make
I would definitely say that the spiritual bastion, is one of the key ones that you also talk a lot about in the book. The narrative that Russia is somehow a traditionalist bastion of Christian values and defending these traditionalist values. That's a huge component for a lot of these hard right-wing Vatniks, I would say.
Yeah, so they see Putin and Russia as this defender of traditional conservative values, where family is number one, and like they're like Putin said, is like in the West you have the parent one and parent two, and this kind of like ridiculous stories. And then when you look at Russia, it's not real. It's completely like they have massive problems with drug use, alcoholism, divorce rates are one of the highest around the world. So it's an illusion. And for some reason, a lot of these MAGA Republicans, right-wing political pundits, they have kind of adopted this idea of traditional Russia, the Orthodox Russia, where like there is no woke issues or whatever, and it's just not true.
Yeah, you're free to hit your wife in the good old traditional Russia, right? it's kind of absurd, but it is, like Pekka says, it's something that's has a very strong appeal to some of these culture warriors like Tucker Carlson. Jordan Peterson would be another prominent Vatnik who really believes in this almost mystical, spiritual Russia, right? We talked to Stephen Lacey about that, how he had actually very much fallen into the Vatnik Soup because of these spiritual narratives about Russia. And yeah, there's a lot to dive into there with the connections to Orthodox fascism, mysticism, someone like Alexander Dugin we also talk about in the book. So, but yeah, I think that's a core ingredient as well for...
Yeah, and I think one thing we should remember, like the Orthodox Church in Russia, it's basically an extension of KGB, FSB. So it's just one intelligence arm there, and it's being used to manipulate people and so on. So it's also yet another very cynical system. So the Patriarch Kirill, what was his real name?
Yeah, Mikhail Gundayev, I believe, yes.
He's a KGB agent, and once you're a KGB agent, you don't really leave the agency. So it's just another tool for manipulation for the masses, and they also use it a lot for propaganda purposes.
Yeah, I would just briefly encourage anyone who doubts Patriarch Kirill's merits to Google Patriarch Kirill Gold Watch. There's a rather funny story there. Some of your viewers might be familiar with it, but he's trying to hide his actual motives, which is just grotesque corruption and wealth behind this spiritual facade. And Putin is happy to accommodate that because it serves his purposes as well.
Okay, first of all, so what are the main ingredients around the war in Ukraine, around Russia, is one of the main key things is that they don't talk about Russia. Because if you start talking about Russia, if you put it under a magnifying glass, you realize that the narrative doesn't hold. So they don't talk about Russia. They talk about the decadent West. They talk about the corrupt Ukraine. Basically, their main goal, I would say that they have two main goals right now. One of them is to prevent any further military aid to Ukraine, and the second one is to ease on the sanctions. That's basically now it's shifting more because of these, like, talk about negotiations and so on. So now the narrative is shifting a bit more to the sanction easing thing, so business can continue as usual. Yeah. But yeah, corrupt Ukraine and it's not. They are not really blaming the Ukrainian people. They are blaming the regime, the Kyiv regime. That is like the very common approach. They've done it historically many times. So that the Russians actually try to save the Ukrainian people from the corrupt regime and so on. This is basically all a big lie, but that's how they usually do it.
Yeah, and then you've also traditionally had the neo-Nazi narrative, but I don't know what you feel, Pekka, but I think that one is kind of fading a bit recently because it's just too silly to maintain. But that's been one of the strong drivers as well. This Ukraine has been infiltrated by neo-Nazis, which also ties into what Pekka says about the real Ukrainians being held hostage by this evil regime, right? And then you tie into that the whole Euromaidan false narratives, which are also very prevalent in Western circles, I believe, with the CIA-sponsored coup. Victoria Nuland, who's apparently some omnipotent figure who has controlled the fate of Ukraine since 2014, and you have all these, this also plays into the conspiracy theory narrative that I was talking about earlier, that nothing can happen in the world basically without the CIA being involved. So these are definitely some of the predominant ones.
Yeah, and also it's kind of okay. They still talk about the fascists and the Nazis, but now they are talking about the Nazis and fascists in countries like Finland, in countries like Latvia. It's so if we go way back, we go to January of 2014. Over 60% of Russians held a positive attitude towards Ukrainians. January 2015. 60% held a negative attitude towards Ukrainians. So that's when they started talking about these fascists and Nazis and so on. So now when they're doing it about Finland, about the Baltic states, about Poland, maybe they are planning something. Because if you think about conventional war, information war comes always before that. So I think they might be cooking something there. Could be an opportunity, could be an actual operation, but I mean, it's extremely alarming that they've kind of ramped up this hate speech towards the Finnish people and especially Latvian, Lithuanian.
Yeah, it feels like they're sort of priming the ground, right? They're staging the first stages. I just saw recently, yesterday, that a member of the State Duma started talking about, 28 or 2029, that's when Europe are going to be attacking Russia. That's when they're priming. So reading into this and knowing that the Russians always project their own agenda onto others, this kind of gets you worried. Okay, is this the date they've started setting for their next invasion, possibly in the Baltics?
Okay, how much money does Russia spend on influence operations? There are estimates. We have to go by estimates. We know that they spend around $3 billion annually on like national media. So that's like RT, Sputnik, and all these like local TVs and newspapers, which is basically just propaganda to the local people. Okay, that's in Russia, but the estimates that how much they spend outside of Russia is around maybe $10 billion, which is like 10 times more than the EU, for example, or I think even more. So we see the asymmetry of the whole thing. So if you spend 10 billion on influence operations abroad, and your enemy or adversary spends 10 million, for example, you can see the difference there. So if we compare to conventional warfare, it's like, okay, the enemy has 100,000 soldiers and you have 1,000 soldiers. You know what the outcome will be. So we are the underdogs. We are massive underdogs, and we will lose the information war. We have lost it like for the last 10 years, and we will keep on losing unless we do something. But still, it's like everybody's talking like how disinformation is the biggest problem in the world, but yet nobody's doing anything.
Yeah,
we are just shrugging and going as usual, and nothing changes.
It's like that old Simpsons joke, where recognizing you have a problem is the first step, and then Homer says, "Is it also the last step?" And it's like, no, it's not the last step. You have to recognize it and then act, right? So that's the problem we're at right now. I believe it was the World Economic Forum who identified disinformation as the biggest threat towards democracy and stability, even ahead of climate change. You might debate that, but still there's a real recognition that this is a top priority, or ought to be, but nothing comes of it. Like you have people like Pekka doing admirable work, but we don't really see, even in Finland or Denmark, an effective response from our governments, like taking this problem seriously. I mean, that's at least my personal view. They have not realized the scale of the information war we're at right now.
Yeah, and we also have to remember that China is still, like, they are just starting their engines. So what will happen once China uses AI to supercharge the whole thing, and they just use their massive amount of resources to do the same as Russia, just as well. So what will happen with liberal democracies in the West? We are in big trouble.
Yeah, and especially considering the news coming out just this week or last week about, Facebook, Meta are going to be skipping their fact-checking section altogether. We know that Twitter, or X as it's called now, has already massively degenerated into a cesspool of misinformation. So with Meta going that same direction, when we should be sailing in the completely opposite direction, is very worrying to me, and is something that really ought to be a stepping stone for the governments to start addressing these online disinformation spaces.
Okay, yeah, Romania is probably the latest example of this. So there was this anti-NATO, pro-Kremlin candidate who basically nobody knew. He's a massive conspiracy theorist who believes that pyramids are energy weapons that haven't been activated yet. That's basically that's one of the most sane conspiracy theories he believes in. So nobody knew who he was. There was the first round of the presidential election, and suddenly he got 20% of the vote. He reported zero budget for his campaign, absolutely nothing. Yet somehow somebody spent around 400,000 euros on TikTok ads. Nobody knows. We all know who it was, but I mean, and basically all of his campaigning was done on TikTok. And this shows how big tool social media can be for politics. Only campaigning on TikTok, and he gained the most votes, 20%. Went to the second round. Romanian intelligence unearthed this Russian influence operation, and they annulled the elections. And now the latest conspiracy theory or the disinformation narrative is coming from Elon Musk and others, is that it was actually the EU that annulled the elections. But the EU, of course, cannot annul any elections. It was done by the Romanian state. But yeah, this is what's happening right now, and we don't have, as we said, there are no ways to kind of counter this at the moment.
Yeah, and adding to what Pekka said there, I visited Moldova last year, actually doing reporting in another circumstance. But I talked to the head of the Moldovan Press Association, and she told me basically to them it's like Chinese water torture, the Russian hybrid warfare. Like it's just drip, 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 slowly eroding the stability and cohesion of Moldovan society, right? And in Moldova you have a bit of a different situation because it is, of course, information warfare and online campaigning, but it's also just classic hybrid warfare, right? Active measures, as the Russians used to call it. So you have, for example, just people being straight up bribed to partake in demonstrations, being bussed in from Transnistria and Gagauzia to partake, and they're handed 30 euros for a day's work of fake protesting. You have an FSB asset named Elon Shaw who basically robbed Moldova. One of my associates down there told me that after he was done with his whole banking fraud scheme in 2014, Moldova was actually reduced to a status of the foreign aid candidate because they had fallen so low on the Human Development Index because he had robbed what amounted to 12% of their GDP. through this bank fraud. So you have these information warfare measures being done, but you also have classic active measures being done towards the Moldovans. Even just when you're down there, you can almost, feel the Russian missiles flying towards Odessa, right? Chisinau is only 100 kilometers, from Odessa. So for them, it's very close. It's very real in another sense, what's going on. And adding to that also just that their country is still occupied, right? Partially in Transnistria by the Russians and has been for 30 years. So it's a very interesting situation in Moldova.
Okay, so when it comes to Russian bullshit, Finland has pretty good resilience. Bullshit is, by the way, is an academic term now, so I can use it. So hopefully I can use it. So Finland was invaded by the Soviets during the World War II. Winter War was a big. We lost around 10% of our land, but basically it was still like a win. Kind of a win for the Finnish, but we still have this collective memory of a very imperialistic Russia and the USSR. But also what we've done really well in Finland is we've integrated this idea of media literacy and critical thinking into the school curriculum. So everybody is being taught about disinformation. So you are 6, you are starting preschool, you are taught about like why lying is bad, what are the consequences of lying and so on. And then it goes from there, like you develop on that. And I mean, it's just basically saying that it can have really bad consequences if you spread disinformation and so on. So it's very much integrated into the whole society and to the school system. But also, I think something that's often forgotten. So for five times in a row, Finland has been the happiest country in the world. And what Russia does really well is they take these problems within societies like immigration, identity politics, and they make stories around them. They make them seem much bigger than they actually are. And if you have a happy society where people are relatively content, it's much more difficult to create this polarization, create distrust towards government or institutions. So that's also provides a good protection against the Russian bullshit. So I think these things are what are protecting. So collective memory from the previous conflict, media literacy in school and throughout the society, and then just making a good, happy society. So I'm going to conclude there.
Yeah, and I think the situation in Denmark is somewhat similar as we are Scandinavian countries. It's, Denmark also ranks fairly high when it comes to, broad happiness. Of course, Denmark is not problem-free. But also we have a high degree of trust in public institutions relative to other countries at least. And also we have the Danish public broadcasting, which has fairly high esteem. So, and one thing I would also add is that I think that both in Finland and Denmark, the Russians just don't have an established foothold in the same way. So it's also hard for them to build upon something. And, on a broad political spectrum, there's not really any where the Russians can, the Kremlin is very opportunist and they don't really see any openings because, all the established parties, even from the far left to the far right, have had a relative degree of consensus regarding the war in Ukraine, condemning Putin's invasion and so forth. So there isn't any loopholes for Putin really to exploit in that sense. Although now it seems some of the right-wing parties have been starting to crack a bit, flirting with Elon Musk and flirting with Trump, going to visit Mar-a-Lago. And yeah, so there might be some openings there that they're willing to exploit, which might segue into your final question.
I think we have to make a comparison. So there has been this term used like Londongrad because of Russian oligarchs buying a lot of real estate and so on. So I think we should start talking more about South African oligarch because that's what they are. Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, they are oligarchs who are trying to gain infinite power, basically.
David Sachs, another prominent.
Yeah. I don't want to say his name even. No, I mean, they are oligarchs, and they are. I see them as opponents of liberal democracy. They are. I mean, Elon Musk has obviously manipulated the X platform so that his message is always heard, it's always seen. And yeah, just a short story. So during Super Bowl, Joe Biden made a tweet and Elon Musk made a tweet. Joe Biden's tweet was much more popular than Elon's. So Elon went to the X office and told the engineers that we have to change the algorithm so that everybody sees my posts or tweets. So whenever he posts, even if you don't follow the guy, you see Elon's tweets, and there's a lot of them. So that's social media manipulation. That's if we look at the Digital Services Act of the EU, that's illegal. That shouldn't be allowed. It's manipulation, and I think it's something that we need to address.
Yes, he seems like you Brits would say a rather petulant child, right? In some respects, he seems very much in search of validation constantly, and even this newest scandal enveloping with his gaming credentials being faked, it's rather pathetic, right? But claiming to be a top 20 player in a game and then streaming himself, obviously barely managing the basic functions of the game. It's all rather pathetic, but he seems like this person who desperately tries to fill a hole inside himself, and has now exceedingly gotten wealthy and has realized, hold on, this is still not enough. I'm still miscontent, right? So he seems like a genuinely miserable man, to me at least.
My hopes and predictions for 2025. I hope that we finally wake up to this problem, massive problem that is disinformation. I'm afraid it will not happen because I've often talked about this post-truth society where emotions kind of triumph over the truth, and it's a kind of a sad situation. But I hope that we in Europe can come up with mechanisms to fight this problem, because it needs to be fought. There is a massive rise of far-right politics, extremely like xenophobia and so on. So these are problems that need to be addressed. They are real problems that need to be, but it needs to be done politically. It doesn't, like you had the Southport protests, and this is just not okay that people can kind of coordinate and do these massive demonstrations, violent demonstrations online, and then just say, okay, this is freedom of speech. So that's not how it works. And I think we need mechanisms to fight that. And we also need mechanisms to fight these international oligarchs, be they from Russia or from South Africa. We need to be able to tell them that, okay, you cannot do influence operations, political operations and influence operations in our countries without any consequences. I think that needs to stop.
Yes, just adding on to what Pekka said there, I think I do expect the UK to kind of step up and do enact some laws which is needed regarding foreign influence, because we have seen the disastrous results in the US following the Citizens United decision, right? Just basically allowing unlimited money into politics. And we need to make sure that we limit that from a European perspective. I mean, from my perspective, American politics is kind of gone off the deep end, and this Citizens United has a lot to do with that. So we definitely need to realize that we can't allow money to basically buy political power, which is the definition of an oligarchy, right? So I think we need, my hopes and expectations to end on a bit of a positive note is that there will be some more legislation done to prevent money from buying political power. I could also fear that some of these extremely xenophobic, racist, right-wing parties will be gaining more ground, but But Pekka and I will of course continue our work with Vatnik Soup, and we'll be publishing the second edition here in a month or so. So people can buy that to get a bit of a boost, a cure against this disinformation, and maybe also against the hopelessness. We can actually try to combat this by educating ourselves. So one final thing I want to add is I also do expect that the Russian state will be taking a hard dive economically, right? You read the economic variables, you see that this is actually really going bad. The Russians really need the sanctions to stop, because their economy is on the verge of really collapsing full scale, right? The ruble has skyrocketed again, and I feel we do live in sort of a disinformation narrative regarding the Russian economy, where we just pretend that these figures that the Russian central bank post out about 3% growth. Oh yes, we know the Russians are willing to lie about everything, but of course we believe them when they say they have a growth, right? So I think the Russian economy is looking wholly unsustainable, and I think that is a positive note. We need to tighten the sanctions even further, turn the screws even harder on it, and keep up the support for Ukraine, basically, and keep a level head, keep ourselves informed, and keep educating the public, like Pekka is trying to do through his work. So yeah, I think I'll end it on that positive note.